Hey, what's up, you guys? Are you ready for another lesson? Yeah? I really hope you're enjoying learning about earthquakes for these last several lessons. We're already on lesson 5. Can you believe that? Again, I think this is just one of those really cool, interesting topics, and all of my students have always loved this book, so I hope you are enjoying it as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into our learning intention. Again, we are learning to identify figurative language in the text, so that way we have a better understanding of the text, because sometimes the author doesn't just say exactly what they mean. And we know we are successful when we can define figurative language. So we got to be able to say, what is it? Identify it in the text, and then determine the meaning of it. All right? So just 3 things to do today. So let's go ahead and think about foundational skills. So you do have a practice read today, and you have multiple meaning words because that's what you've been working on with those foundational skills. So this one is called Missing Pieces by Margaret Wu. And you have a few multiple meaning words like the word down, groom, hit, last, lay, left, pride, right, rose, and well. So those are your multiple meaning words for you to focus on and thinking about, wait, what do they mean in this context, right? So I hope you enjoy reading that. Again, make sure that you take your time and even read it several times through so that way you can practice getting really good with that text. For vocabulary, we have the word foundations. That's the support upon which something rests, okay? We're not talking about like your foundation with your makeup, girls. We're talking about the foundation of like a building. So it says the building's tilted when the soil beneath the foundations turned to quicksand. So in our picture here, this is the example of like a foundation for like a post that's getting ready to go up. A lot of times foundations will be made like concrete, something very strong to hold something in place. So let's go ahead and we're going to get right into reading. All right, guys? So I feel like this is going super quick. So it says, sand, mud, and water sometimes bubble up during earthquakes, gushing water and soil like miniature mud volcanoes. These sand boils are particularly dangerous to buildings. In places where water is close to the surface, sandy layers turn into quicksand, and buildings tilt and crumble. During the 1989 San Francisco earthquake, sand boils erupted in basements and yards beneath houses all over the Marina District. So, that sounds really kind of scary. And thinking about that with our stop and think question, why are sand boils dangerous to buildings? Let's use that text evidence. It says, these sand boils, right here in the second sentence, these sand boils are particularly dangerous to buildings. In places where water is close to the surface, sandy layers turn into quicksand and buildings tilt and crumble. So why are they dangerous? Because the ground like turns into quicksand, so the buildings just like tilt and fall over. They crumble because they don't have that solid foundation to stand on anymore. That would be scary, especially if you have a sand boil popping up in your basement. These apartment houses in Niigata, Japan, tilted and tumbled as a result of an earthquake in 1964. The buildings tilted when the soil beneath the foundations turned to quicksand. About a third of the city sank by as much as 6 feet. So imagine that, guys. 6 feet. That's how far we're supposed to be staying apart, right? It's like 6 feet is taller than me. So imagine the building sinking into the ground 6 feet. Okay, look at the door in your room. Okay, that's a little bit taller than 6 feet. Okay, it's taller than 6 feet, but imagine that door is almost all the way underground now. Okay, sinking 6 feet. That's a big deal. So those foundations are really important for them to be strong and secure. On the afternoon of Good Friday, March 27, 1964, Anchorage, Alaska was shaken apart by the most violent earthquake ever recorded in the United States. It measured 8.4 on the Richter scale. Government Hill Elementary School was split in two when the ground beneath it dropped. Houses began sliding apart. Giant cracks opened in the pavement and the ground rolled in huge waves. In the first 3 days after the earthquake, 300 aftershocks shook the buildings that remained standing. Remember, we've talked about in that sequence of events, after the main earthquakes happened, then there can be aftershocks or smaller earthquakes that happen afterwards for days or even weeks. So in this case, it says over 300 aftershocks occurred. That's a lot. So here is a picture of Government Elementary School. Now, this was not a two-story like school, guys, where it wasn't split to start off with. It was all put together, but with that earthquake, some of the ground sank. And so it was split into these two pieces. Imagine if that was your school, like being split right there. That would be so scary. Hopefully no one was hurt in this. And again, here's more pictures. Looking at this boat. Doesn't look like it's in the water anymore. The Good Friday earthquake brought another type of destruction along the coastline. The focus of the earthquake was deep beneath the waters of the Prince William Sound in the Gulf of Alaska. The earthquake acted like a giant paddle churning the water. So remember, we talked about churning before. They start like kind of mixing them and like imagine that giant paddle like stirring the water. Tsunamis battered the land for hours. An entire section of the waterfront at the port of Seward cracked off and slid into the ocean. Boats were overturned, buildings broke apart, and everything was left in a tangled mess. The tsunamis moved across the Pacific at speeds of hundreds of miles an hour, reaching as far as Hawaii and even Japan, 4,000 miles away. So imagine, even Hawaii and Japan, that are so far away from Alaska, they also are feeling the effects of this earthquake. So let's see. What have we learned about the impact of earthquakes on large bodies of water? Do you say they're bad? Well, yeah, of course. Can you give me some more details, please? Yeah, so it can overturn boats. It causes tsunamis, right? So that's a good word, a tsunami. A tsunami is like a big wave, okay? So, and tsunamis can impact land hundreds and thousands of miles away, like in the case of it impacting Japan. So let's get back to our learning intention today. We are learning about the use of figurative language. So figurative language uses figures of speech such as metaphors and similes to show how one thing is like another. A simile is a comparison of two unlike things using the words like or as. So, for example, we have the sentence, "The fabric was as bright as the stars." Okay, so it's comparing the fabric and its brightness to the stars. Okay, is the fabric actually as bright as the stars? Well, no, of course not. But it's giving us that comparison. We can imagine how bright the stars are and then thinking about the fabric and maybe that color about how bright it is. So the fabric and stars, two very different things, two unlike things, but they, again, use the word as in this case to compare. As bright as the stars. So we're using that word as to compare. We also sometimes use the word like to compare, or a simile. And that's what we're going to focus on today, are similes. So here we have a paragraph from the text, and we want to find the simile. And again, a simile is a comparison of two unlike things using the word like or as. So our hint for finding the simile is to look for the word like or the word as. Sand, mud, and water sometimes bubble up during earthquakes, gushing water and soil like miniature mud volcanoes. Oh, did you hear it? Gushing water and soil like miniature mud volcanoes. Right there, that is a simile. So it says in this first sentence, sand, mud, and water sometimes bubble up during earthquakes, gushing water and soil like miniature mud volcanoes. So it's comparing all this sand, mud, and water that's bubbling up to a miniature mud volcano, to a volcano. We know what a volcano is. We can picture that in our brain. And we'll learn about volcanoes later in our reading units. But it's comparing these to a volcano. That's something, they're not the same thing, but it helps us to picture and understand what the author is talking about when they're comparing these sand boils to like a miniature mud volcano, right? Right? See what I'm saying? So, like I said, the author is comparing the sand boils to the miniature mud volcanoes. Let's find another simile. The Good Friday earthquake brought another type of destruction along the coastline. The focus of the earthquake was deep beneath the waters of the Prince William Sound in the Gulf of Alaska. The earthquake acted like a giant paddle churning the waters. Did you catch it? Remember, a simile compares two things using the word like or the word as. So we're looking for either the word like or the word as. I'm looking, the Good Friday earthquake brought another type of destruction along the coastline. Okay, in that first sentence, it didn't have the word like and it did not have the word as. The focus of the earthquake was deep beneath the waters of the Prince William Sound in the Gulf of Alaska. Again, no like or as, so it must be in this last sentence. The earthquakes acted like a giant paddle churning the waters. So this time, it's right there at the end. The earthquake acted like a giant paddle churning the waters, and it's comparing the earthquake to a giant paddle. So imagine this earthquake, it's churning the water, like stirring it, causing those big waves. So it says it acted like a giant paddle, okay? So imagine like a paddle, like a rowboat, okay, but huge to really stir up that water to move it. All right, so we are back to our learning intentions. So today we are learning to identify figurative language in the text, okay? So that way we can have a better understanding of the text. So can we define figurative language? Remember, that's like a figurative speech. Like today we're talking about a simile. And a simile is a comparison that compares two unlike things using the words like or as. All right? Okay. Identify figurative language in the text. So we just did that 2 times by looking for those similes, and we focused on the words like or as. Check mark. And then determine the meaning of the figurative language. We did that as well, right? We talked about on this last one, it churned the water like a paddle, or the earthquake acted like a paddle churning the water. Okay, we recognized that meant that it was really like moving the water. Okay, check mark. Awesome job, guys. So we've mastered those 3 success criteria. So your reading response, now it's time for you to apply and show that you know what's going on and that you have mastered the success criteria. I have 2 parts for you. So number 1, it says, in a simile describing the tsunamis created by underwater earthquakes, which of these things would be the best comparison? Would it be like a supersonic jet, or would we say the earthquake is like a traffic jam? So if we're thinking about an underwater earthquake, and thinking about those waters churning, do you think you would compare it to a supersonic jet or a traffic jam? Okay. And then would a simile that compares 2 new or unfamiliar ideas be helpful to readers? Why or why not? So if you have a simile that compares 2 things that you have no idea about, would that help you understand the text? Why or why not? All right. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Do all of your work. Be kind to one another. And I will see y'all later. Bye.